Welcome, everyone. I hope you're all doing well today. Before we dive into this new story, I'm curious. Where are you joining us from? Whether it's the bustling city streets or a peaceful countryside, I hope this story can transport you to a place where you can experience every moment with me. Let's begin. Chapter 1. A quiet moment before the storm. It had been a long day, and Matt Davidson was looking forward to returning home. As a small business owner, the weight of the workday often pressed heavily on his shoulders. But today, there was an unusual stillness in the air, the kind of calm that felt almost too quiet, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. He stepped out of his truck and glanced around his suburban neighborhood, nothing unusual. Just the typical houses lined with manicured lawns and the occasional dog barking from behind a fence. It was a typical evening, but as Matt approached his front door, something stopped him. His dog, Max, a large German shepherd, stood by the front gate, ears perked and his body tense. The dog wasn't barking, but there was a strange, almost nervous energy emanating from him. "Max, what is it, buddy?" Matt called out, his voice filled with concern. Max's response wasn't a bark, but a low whine, his gaze fixed on the small wooden shed at the end of the yard. The shed was old, worn down from years of neglect, but something about it seemed different tonight. Matt paused, a strange chill creeping down his spine. "I'll check it out, Max," Matt reassured, even as his gut twisted with unease. As he made his way to the shed, the hair on the back of his neck stood up. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves in a way that sounded almost unnatural. The world seemed too still, like it was holding its breath. When Matt opened the door to the shed, his eyes immediately locked on something small, hidden in the shadows. At first, he couldn't make out what it was, but as his eyes adjusted, a small figure became visible in the dim light, a girl. No more than 7 or 8 years old, sitting on the cold wooden floor. Her blonde hair was matted and tangled, her clothes torn and filthy. Her large eyes, filled with terror, looked up at him. Matt froze. He had no idea how she had ended up there, but everything in him told him she was in trouble. Max growled softly behind him, a low rumble that seemed to echo the unease building in Matt's chest. "Hey, it's okay," Matt said gently, crouching down to her level. "You're safe now. What's your name?" The girl didn't speak at first. She was trembling, clearly terrified, but after a long moment, she whispered, "Emily." "Emily? Huh?" Matt said softly. "That's a beautiful name. How did you get here?" Emily's lips trembled, and she clutched her knees tighter to her chest. It was clear she was scared, and whatever had happened to her, she wasn't ready to talk about it. Matt's heart ached for her, but he wasn't going to force her to speak if she wasn't ready. "It's okay," he said, trying to reassure her. "You don't have to talk about it right now. But you're safe here, okay?" Max, sensing her fear, stepped forward and gently nudged Emily's leg with his nose. The girl hesitated, but then, as if drawn by an unspoken bond, she reached down and started to pet him. For the first time since Matt had found her, a small, tentative smile crept onto her face. That was all the confirmation Matt needed. Max had found her for a reason. He wasn't sure what kind of trouble they were in, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let this little girl slip away again. "Do you want to come inside?" Matt asked, his voice soft. Emily nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Max. "Yes, please." As they walked inside, Matt couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far bigger than he could ever have imagined. The air around them felt charged, as if something was coming, something that would change everything. The house was quiet when they entered, the usual creaks of the old wooden floors a welcome sound in the stillness of the evening. Matt led Emily to the living room, where he could see the same familiar warmth of home, but tonight it felt different, unsettled, as though something or someone was watching them. The hairs on the back of Matt's neck stood up again as he looked over his shoulder. No one was there, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. Max, as if sensing Matt's unease, sat close to Emily, who was still looking around. Her eyes wide, she seemed to shrink into herself, as if the house, though safe, was a place where she didn't quite belong. Matt turned to her, trying to break the silence. "Are you hungry, Emily?" She nodded slowly, and Matt moved to the kitchen, making a simple meal of pasta and bread. As the smell filled the room, Emily's expression softened, but she still clutched Max's fur as though it were her only lifeline. Matt felt a pang of guilt. How long had she been without food? And who had done this to her? As they ate, Matt tried to make conversation, gently asking questions, but Emily's answers were short. She was still closed off, not ready to speak about her past. He didn't want to push, but the questions were eating at him. Where had she come from? Who had put her in that shed? And more importantly, why? After dinner, Emily went to the guest room, and Matt tucked her in, making sure she had everything she needed. He couldn't shake the feeling of unease, so he decided to stay up a little longer. He had to know more. He needed to figure out what had happened and what was coming next. Just as he was about to settle into the couch with his laptop, his phone rang, breaking the silence. It was an unknown number. He hesitated before answering. Hello? The voice on the other end was familiar, but it took a moment for Matt to place it. Matt, it's Claire, the voice said. I need to talk to you. It's about Emily. Matt's heart skipped a beat. Where are you? He asked, urgency rising in his chest. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Claire replied before hanging up. Claire was Matt's old friend, a private investigator who specialized in cases involving missing persons. Her voice was filled with worry, and Matt's mind raced as he thought about the implications. Emily wasn't just a random child. There was something more, something Claire knew that Matt didn't. As the minutes passed, Matt couldn't help but wonder what kind of trouble they were about to face. But one thing was for certain, he was going to protect Emily. No matter what. When Claire arrived, Matt quickly filled her in on everything. He showed her the shed, the spot where he'd found Emily, and explained how she had reacted when he asked about her past. Matt, I don't know how to say this, but Emily's not just any missing child, Claire said, her voice low. She's connected to a bigger case. A case that has people looking for her. And these people? They're dangerous. Matt's stomach twisted as Claire explained that Emily had been part of an underground adoption scheme that had gone terribly wrong. She'd been abandoned, left to fend for herself when the operation collapsed. You're not safe here, Matt, Claire continued, her eyes serious. They'll be looking for her. And they won't stop until they find her. Matt's heart sank. He'd known something wasn't right. But now, it was clear. They were in far more danger than he'd imagined. Chapter 2. The Truth Unravels. The quiet of the house was almost suffocating as Matt sat in the living room, his mind racing after Claire's phone call. She was a private investigator, but what she had just told him felt like it was straight out of a thriller. Emily wasn't just a lost child. She was a key piece in a much larger and far more dangerous puzzle. Matt stared at the clock. His fingers drummed impatiently on the arm of the couch. Claire said she'd be there in 20 minutes. That was 10 minutes ago. But it felt like hours. He couldn't shake the thought that someone, or something, was closing in on them. The nagging feeling in the pit of his stomach only grew stronger with every passing second. As Matt moved toward the window, checking the street outside one more time, his eyes caught Max, still curled up by Emily's side. The dog had been a calming presence ever since Matt had found Emily in the shed. Max had sensed her distress and had been by her side without question. It was almost as if the dog knew they were in for something far bigger than just a lost child. He took a deep breath, wiping his hand over his face, trying to calm himself, but the unease wouldn't go away. Just then, the doorbell rang. Matt jumped, his heart racing. He rushed to the door, unlocking it quickly, only to be met by Claire's concerned face. Matt, she said, stepping inside without waiting for him to invite her. We don't have much time. I've been digging, and it's worse than I thought. Matt closed the door behind her, his voice tight with worry. What do you mean? I thought you said Emily's case was tied to that underground adoption ring. But, Claire cut him off, holding up her hand. It's more than just adoption. Emily was involved in a covert operation, one connected to people with power. This isn't some random group of criminals. We're talking about people who can make things disappear. Matt's stomach churned. What kind of people are we talking about here? Government level, Claire replied bluntly. Not just criminals. They have resources, people on the inside. People who can track anyone and everything. That's why no one ever saw Emily after she disappeared. They erased her from the system. Now, whoever is behind this operation wants her back. The gravity of her words hit Matt like a ton of bricks. Emily wasn't just a runaway or a kid who had fallen through the cracks. She was someone important to dangerous people. And they wouldn't stop looking for her. Are you saying they're going to come for her? Matt asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Claire nodded. They're already looking. Matt, they might be closer than we think. As Claire sat down at the kitchen table, her expression grim, Matt's mind raced. How could he protect Emily from something like this? How could he keep her safe when the forces behind her disappearance were so powerful? Matt, Claire said, her voice a little softer now. You need to understand, these people won't stop until they find her. You can't keep her here. They'll trace her here eventually. We need to move her somewhere safe. And fast. Matt didn't hesitate. I'll do whatever it takes. Good, Claire said, standing up. We're going to need help. You can't do this alone. And we need to figure out where Emily came from. The sooner we have that information, the better. As the reality of the situation settled in, Matt felt the weight of the responsibility that had suddenly fallen on his shoulders. He wasn't just protecting a child anymore, he was protecting a life. A future that could be wiped out with a single phone call or a few too many misplaced steps. Max suddenly barked, interrupting Matt's thoughts, and his eyes darted to the dog, who was standing at the back door, his ears alert and his body stiff. Matt's heart skipped a beat as he looked at Claire. Do you think they've found us already? Matt asked, his voice tight with fear. Claire shook her head. No, not yet, but something's wrong. Matt quickly made his way to the back door, peering out into the yard. He saw nothing at first, just the familiar trees lining the edge of his property. But then, as his eyes swept across the darkened yard, something caught his attention. Movement. A shadow darted between the trees. A person, or was it? Max barked again, louder this time, and Matt didn't hesitate. He grabbed Claire by the arm, pulling her out of the kitchen and toward the back door. Go, now, Matt ordered. They ran for the car, Claire's hand gripping his arm tightly as they hurried toward the driveway. But as Matt started the engine, his mind racing, a sense of dread washed over him. Whoever had been in the yard wasn't just passing through. They had been watching. They had found them. Chapter 3. The chase begins. Matt's heart raced as he slammed the gas pedal to the floor, the engine roaring as the car shot down the street. His eyes darted nervously between the rearview mirror and the road ahead, the darkness of the night offering only a small sense of protection. The trees outside blurred past, but the unease in his chest was unmistakable. Claire's words kept echoing in his mind. Someone, somewhere, was looking for Emily, and they were closer than ever. As he turned the corner, his hand gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. Matt kept checking the rearview mirror, but there was nothing, no sign of pursuit. Not yet. Do you think we're being followed? Claire asked, her voice shaking slightly. She had been silent since they left the house, lost in her own thoughts. But the tension in the car was palpable. I don't know, Matt replied, his gaze still flicking back to the mirror. But I can't afford to take any chances. They'd been driving for hours, taking random turns, avoiding the main roads. It had been Matt's plan from the start. Stay off the grid. Keep moving, and don't stop. Emily needed protection, and Matt wasn't about to let anyone take her. But the further they drove, the more Matt felt a creeping sense of dread. Whoever was after Emily, whoever wanted her back, wasn't going to just let them disappear. I don't think they'll give up, Claire murmured, breaking the silence again. Not when they know she's alive. Matt clenched his jaw. He knew she was right. It wasn't just a missing persons case anymore, it was something much darker. Whoever Emily was, whoever had erased her from the system, they wanted her back, and they wouldn't stop until they had her. The thought made Matt's stomach churn. He had no idea what kind of people they were dealing with. But the sense of danger was clear. They weren't just ordinary criminals. These were people with resources, with power. They could track anyone, anywhere. Matt pulled into a small rest stop off the side of the highway, stopping the car just outside the flickering lights of the diner. He glanced at Claire. We need to lay low for a bit. Claire nodded but didn't say anything, her eyes still scanning the parking lot nervously. She hadn't let her guard down since they left. Emily was asleep in the backseat, her small form curled up under a blanket. But even in her sleep, she was tense. The trauma from the last few days was still fresh, still raw. We should call the police, Claire suggested quietly, her voice almost a whisper. Matt shook his head. Not yet. If they're already looking for her, we can't risk drawing attention. We need to figure out who's behind all of this first. If we go to the police now, we'll just be putting Emily in more danger." Claire let out a sigh. "You're right, but we can't keep running forever. We need help." "I know," Matt said, "and we will. But for now, we need to keep moving. Stay under the radar." They both sat in silence for a few moments. The hum of the diner's neon sign buzzing in the background. It was quiet now, but that only made Matt more anxious. The quiet was a false sense of security. Suddenly, Max barked from the backseat. His growl deep in warning. His body was tense. His ears pricked up. Matt's heart skipped a beat. It was a sound that wasn't meant to be ignored. "Matt, what is it?" Claire asked urgently. "I don't know, but it's not good," Matt replied, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror once again. This time, he saw something that made his stomach drop. A black car, moving slowly through the parking lot. Its headlights cutting through the night like a spotlight. Matt's grip tightened on the wheel. "They've found us." He could feel the panic rising in his chest. But he forced it back down. He wasn't going to let Emily see his fear. Not now. Not when she needed him to stay strong. "Claire," Matt said urgently, "get Emily out of the car. Now, we're going." Without asking any more questions, Claire unbuckled her seatbelt and hurriedly reached for Emily. She shook the girl awake, her voice low and calm as she told her to follow her. Emily didn't ask questions, she was used to following orders by now. Matt started the engine, his pulse quickening. The car in the parking lot hadn't moved yet, but Matt knew it wouldn't take long before it was headed their way. He shifted into gear and drove off quickly, not looking back. "Stay low, both of you," he said, his voice tight. "If they're after us, we can't let them catch us." They sped down the back roads, trying to stay out of sight. The car in the parking lot wasn't far behind, and Matt could hear the engine grow louder as the distance closed. His hands tightened on the wheel. There was no way to outrun them in the long run, but he had to try. The town was quiet as they cut through the streets, taking the winding roads and alleyways. Matt glanced nervously at Claire in the passenger seat, her eyes darting to every passing car. "I don't know how much longer we can keep this up," she said, her voice barely audible. Matt didn't answer. He was too focused on the road ahead, on getting them out of this. But with each passing minute, the realization hit harder. They were running out of time. They needed a plan, and fast. Chapter 4. The Final Escape. Matt's heart hammered in his chest as the car sped through the winding roads. Every curve felt sharper, every second more intense. The black car that had been following them was closing in. They were getting too close. Too close for comfort. "Matt, we can't outrun them forever," Claire said, her voice tight with fear. She gripped Emily's hand tightly, pulling the girl closer to her. Emily's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. But she trusted Matt and Claire. That trust was the only thing that kept her calm. "We just need to keep going," Matt said through gritted teeth, his hands clenching around the steering wheel. "We're getting close. There's a place, a cabin, not far from here. We can make it." Max's low growl from the backseat reminded them that time was running out. The dog had been on edge for the entire ride, sensing the danger that was closing in. Matt's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror again. The black car was still there, right on their tail, and they were driving faster than they ever had before. The trees blurred past, their branches scraping against the car as they barreled through the dense woods. Matt's mind raced, trying to figure out his next move. He couldn't keep driving like this. He needed to lose them. But how? A sharp turn appeared up ahead, a narrow trail that led deeper into the woods. It was a risky move, but it was their only shot. Without hesitation, Matt yanked the wheel to the right, sending the car skidding through the dirt road. Claire gasped, but Matt kept his eyes locked on the trail ahead. The car behind them didn't slow down. Matt could hear the engine roaring as it followed them. Determined to catch up, he pushed the gas pedal to the floor, the tires screeching as they fought for traction on the uneven ground. "Hold on," Matt shouted, his voice tense with urgency. Emily clutched Claire's arm, her eyes squeezed shut as the car bounced violently over the uneven ground. Claire's heart raced in her chest as she glanced back at the road, her mind screaming at her to stay calm. But the fear for Emily's safety was overwhelming. They hit a small bump, and the car jolted into the air before slamming back down. Claire's breath caught in her throat as she held onto Emily, trying to shield her from the worst of it. The car swerved dangerously. But Matt was skilled. He knew these roads, knew how to maneuver. He wasn't going to let them crash. But the car behind them wasn't letting up. The headlights were relentless, illuminating the trail behind them like a beacon. They were gaining ground. "This is insane," Claire cried out. "They're not going to stop." Matt's jaw clenched. He wasn't going to let them take Emily. He wasn't going to lose her. They reached the end of the trail, where the road split into two. The left path led up to a high cliffside, the right to a deep ravine. There was no time to think, no time to hesitate. Matt slammed the steering wheel to the right, sending the car toward the ravine. He had one chance to make it out alive. The tires slid through the dirt, and Matt could hear the engine of the black car behind them struggle to follow. He took the curve too fast, and for a moment, it felt like the car was flying through the air. The ground beneath them was unstable, and Matt fought for control. He pulled the wheel to the left, trying to straighten the car, but it was too late. They hit the edge of the ravine. The car lurched, and Claire screamed as she saw the drop below them. "Hold on," Matt shouted as the car careened toward the edge. Max barked in the backseat, sensing the danger, but there was nothing anyone could do. They were going over the edge. For a heart-stopping moment, the car seemed to hang in the air before it crashed downward, landing with a sickening thud. The impact jolted everyone, but somehow, the car stayed upright, its tires scraping against the rocky ground. Matt's breath came in quick gasps as he fought to keep control. The car teetered on the edge of the ravine, but it didn't fall. Not yet. "Are we okay?" Claire's voice trembled with fear, but she was already unbuckling herself, checking on Emily. Matt took a deep breath, his fingers still tight on the steering wheel. "We're okay, but we need to move now." The car was still alive, but it wouldn't last much longer in the state it was in. They needed to get out of there, and fast. Claire helped Emily out of the car, her movements hurried but careful. Max jumped out after them, his tail wagging but his body tense, as if sensing the danger was far from over. "Matt, what now?" Claire asked, her voice urgent. "We keep moving," Matt said, glancing back at the path they had just come from. "They'll be coming down that road any second now." The sound of an engine reached their ears, and Matt's heart skipped a beat. It was the black car. They hadn't lost them yet. They ran, not looking back, pushing themselves through the underbrush. The thick woods surrounded them, providing some cover, but Matt knew it wouldn't last. The ravine had been a last-ditch attempt to lose their pursuers, but it had only bought them a few precious minutes. They reached a small clearing, and Matt quickly scanned their surroundings. He saw a narrow dirt trail leading away from the ravine, disappearing deeper into the woods. It was their only hope. "We have to keep moving," Matt said, leading the way down the trail. "Stay close. Don't make a sound." They ran for what felt like hours, the moonlight barely enough to guide them through the darkness. Their breath came in ragged gasps, the weight of their situation pressing down on them with every step. As they pushed through the trees, Matt could hear the sound of the black car in the distance. They hadn't lost them yet, but something unexpected happened. The sound of the engine grew quieter. Matt dared to glance over his shoulder, and for the first time, he saw it. The car was no longer behind them. In fact, it had disappeared entirely. "Did we lose them?" Claire whispered. Matt didn't answer right away. He kept walking, his senses alert, but the silence around them was deafening. "I think we did," Matt said finally, a sense of disbelief settling over him. "We made it." But even as he spoke those words, Matt couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Whoever was after Emily wouldn't just stop because they ran into the woods. This was only the beginning. As they kept moving, Matt couldn't help but wonder, how long would they be safe? How long before the people chasing them would find them again? He didn't know, but one thing was for sure, he wasn't going to stop fighting to protect Emily. Not now, not ever.